If you know many history nerds, then there's a pretty good chance at one point they tried to impress you with a useless piece of trivia. Hey, did you know that at William the Conqueror's funeral, it was so hot inside the church that his body actually exploded? Hey, did you know that the Nazis tried to teach dogs to talk so they could send them on secret missions? Hey, did you know that the ancient Egyptians circumnavigated Africa? Dude, what the fuck? And while talking Nazi dogs would be a fantastic subject for a video, I would like to focus on that last little tidbit. Did ancient Egyptians successfully circumnavigate Africa? A lot of online sources state it as fact, but did it actually happen? Well, as with so many events of the ancient world, a lot of our primary sources are pretty spotty and incomplete and not very reliable. The only account that we have of this expedition is from the famous Greek historian Herodotus. And he was writing only about 100 years after the events supposedly took place, so I don't think it's too crazy to say that his information might be pretty accurate. First, some historical context. The year is about 600 BCE. Necho II is the Pharaoh of Egypt, and he had a big dream. He wanted to dominate the areas that Egypt had once controlled during the glory days of Ramses II. So he invaded Canaan and Syria. Canaan, by the way, is kind of Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, that area. He ended up destroying an Israelite army at the Battle of Megiddo and slew their king, Josiah. The Bible tells us all about that. And for a moment, it looked like his dreams were finally coming true. But then the Babylonians started getting handsy, and after suffering a series of defeats, the Egyptians ended up retreating out of the Holy Land and Syria, leaving Jerusalem to Nebuchadnezzar II, who famously destroyed the Temple of Solomon and took the Jews to captivity in Babylon, where they presumably had a lot of time on their hands because they wrote a book, which ended up being put in the nightstand drawers of motel rooms for millennia to come. But anyway, Necho decided to give up on this ambition and instead turned his gaze to the west and north, and allied himself with the Greek-speaking people of the Aegean Sea. He traded extensively with them, and at that point, he got another big idea. He decided to dig a canal from the Nile River to the Red Sea. The idea was to connect the Mediterranean world of trade with the kind of Red Sea, East African world of trade. For thousands of years, the Egyptians had been trading with the people of the land of Punt, which is kind of where Ethiopia and Eritrea are today. And there were all sorts of exotic East African goods there, like, myrrh and ivory and ebony and incense and all that kind of stuff that the Egyptians really sought after. So Necho presumably thought that he would be able to make a pretty penny, charging these Greeks to get into the Red Sea and, benefit from that African trade. But for some unknown reason, Necho never finished his canal. He had to give up on his dreams again. So he had a third big idea. He got it into his head that he wanted to send a few ships down the Red Sea, past the Horn of Africa, and see if they could make it to the Pillars of Hercules, modern-day Gibraltar, and then go back to Egypt from there. He hired Phoenician sailors to crew the ships.
Phoenician.
Which was probably wise. The Phoenicians were renowned throughout the ancient Near East as superb sailors, and their ancestors, the Canaanites, had been as well. I mean, their whole culture was steeped in this long tradition of maritime trade and exploration. Herodotus tells us what happened next. So the Phoenicians set out from the Red Sea and sailed the southern sea. Whenever autumn came, they would put in and sow the land to whatever part of Libya they might come, and there await the harvest. Then, having gathered in the crop, they sailed on, so that after 2 years had passed, they rounded the Pillars of Hercules and came to Egypt. There they said, what some may believe, though I do not, that in sailing round Libya, they had the sun on their right hand. That last sentence is what has most modern scholars convinced that this expedition did actually happen. Because when they say that the sun was on their right hand, they're basically talking about the fact that while they were sailing along the coast of South Africa, sailing west, the sun rose and fell to the north. So when you're down there in the southern hemisphere, the sun generally is kind of northerly in the sky. The reason that Herodotus is so incredulous about this is because he thought, as well as many Greeks of the era, that the Indian Ocean was actually an inland sea. And that, hey, sweet, and that basically you couldn't go around Africa. It connected to Southeast Asia at a certain point. Hey, lovey. Hey, how's it going? No, he's not bothering me. It's okay, bud. Oh, how dare they? How dare they walk by? How dare they? Hey, buddy. Hi. What's frustrating is that little tidbit that I just read you, that is the only record that we have of the expedition. That is all that Herodotus says about it. So an epic 3-year journey around Africa gets condensed to a single paragraph from probably like a third or fourth hand source. Thankfully, we have a more detailed account of another African expedition, this one by the Phoenicians' cousins, the Carthaginians, and made about a century later. This one was led by a guy named Hanno the Navigator. It's unclear how far exactly he got. It was probably somewhere in the Ivory Coast, but basically the whole idea was that he brought a bunch of ships and a bunch of people down the coast of West Africa to establish some Carthaginian colonies. Now, the source we have for this one is a Greek translation of a Punic account. And if it's to be believed, then they had some pretty crazy adventures. At one point, they disembarked on an island off the coast, and this is what they saw and heard. By day, we could see nothing but a forest, but by night we saw many fires burning, and we heard the sound of flutes, and of beating of cymbals and drums, and a great din of voices. Fear came upon us, and the soothsayers bade us to leave the island. Shit, that's scary. I mean, can you imagine just hearing all the drums and the voices and shouting off in the jungle and fires and shit, and then basically saying, oh, we need to go back to the ship! We need to go back to the ship! I know, Sal, it's very frightening. At one point, they passed an erupting volcano somewhere on the coast. We sailed thence in haste and skirted a fiery coast replete with burning incense. Great streams of fire and lava poured down into the sea, and the land was unapproachable because of the heat. Cool! And at the end of the text, we have the earliest written description of gorillas in history. At the farther end of this bay was an island, like the first, with a lake, within which was another island full of savages. By far the greater number were women with shaggy bodies, whom our interpreters called gorillae. Chasing them, we were unable to catch any of the men, all of whom, being used to climbing precipices, got away, defending themselves by throwing stones. But we caught 3 women, who bit and mangled those who carried them off, being unwilling to follow them. We killed them, however, and flayed them, and brought their skins back to Carthage. So yeah, they just thought gorillas were just hairy, savage people. Although this does give me a little bit of pause, this description when they say that they carried off the females. Like, what exactly is your intention with these female gorillas, Hanno? And when American and European naturalists first encountered gorillas in the 19th century, they named them gorillas because of this mention of gorillae in Hanno's account. And while I got no disrespect for Hanno, I mean, apart from killing and potentially sexually assaulting endangered animals, his expedition, I mean, it really pales in comparison to Necho's. And one can only imagine, I mean, think about it, if the Carthaginians saw all of these amazing things in just a short jaunt down the West African coast, you know, who's to say the sort of adventures that the Phoenicians got into when they went around all of Africa? If only we could somehow bring one of these sailors back to life, resurrect them even, so they could tell us their story. I wonder if there may be a way. Don't worry, it's just a book. No harm ever came from reading a book.
No! You must not read from the book!
Shout out to my very generous patron, Natalie Fulton, who also happens to be my girlfriend. She's decided to pay me $50 every month to force me to say humiliating things in a public forum. This month, she has requested that I acknowledge that she is the pack leader over myself and our dog, Sal. What do you think, Sal? Who's the pack leader? Natalie is. God damn it, Sal.